SwayamPrabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course, Disaster Recovery and Build Back Better. Today we are going to talk about designing culturally responsive built environments in disaster context. When we talk about the cultural responsive built environments in a disaster context, and one has to understand the basics of the cultural issues and how especially they are related to the built to meet needs and how they change from the pre-disaster context, during disaster and the post-disaster context and over a long run process. So this is where I would like to introduce you to the contribution of Paul Oliver's work on built to meet needs, on especially the part 4 on cultures, disasters and dwellings. And he brings a number of cases along with it and how culture has been overlooked in the recovery process, and as a result what kind of spaces are produced, and as a response situation what kind of meanings have developed. And this is where how development and culture are not related to each other in the process. We have also seen a similar examples in the tsunami recovery process in Tamil Nadu, the case of Tamil Nadu. So today we will be covering about places in Turkey, in the Mediterranean countries, and also the recent Hudhud cyclone, which my present work is also going on. So the picture which you are seeing here is in the Cappadocia and also the central Anatolian region of Turkey. There is a very different landscapes of these pinnacles, the tufa rock pinnacles, which are spread over in the Anatolian region. And these are basically formed from the ancient deposits of the lava dust. And because of the air exposure to the air, this soft rock hardens so that the interiors can have the firm walls and the stone can be carved with some voids, and which actually becomes a kind of living spaces. So in fact, if you ever look into the Turkey, it actually falls the fault line, the global fault line, which actually passes through the Turkey, and Turkey is prone to the earthquakes. And these tufa pinnacles, being a very soft rock nature, they often collapse, destroying many dwellings and also causing a serious loss of life. So what you can see here is you can see the frequent damages which is occurring to these pinnacles. And in fact, one is also very much concerned about how to protect these natural forms. In fact, there are some of the case studies in Kausin village in the old Greek town, which is about in Gormet, it's just 4 kilometers from the Goremet-Avnas road. So here it's a kind of big mountain which is embedded with a lot of dwellings, which is intricate dwellings which are embedded like a mountain. What you can see is all the dwellings, series of dwellings which are very organic nature of it. And you can see that destructions have happened because of the frequent earthquakes and also the erosion due to the exposure to the air, and also the rocks, the soft rock keeps falling down, and a lot of destruction over there. And during the earthquakes, and of course these communities were given an opportunity to go back and resettle in some place. But somehow they denied going back. Many of the communities, they denied going back, and they came back and they tried to settle in the vicinity of this village. Despite of knowing that this place is prone to the earthquakes and there is a danger They are going to live on this edge conditions. But still, why do you think that these people have come and stayed here back? Here, we have to notice one thing. It is not just only on the matter of safety which communities have thought, there is also the other aspect of their livelihood which they also have, which has actually attracted them back to it. And that is where, because it's being a tourist spot, so it has actually brought these people back, and they started, instead of settling in the above areas, they started settling in the bottom part, in the foothill area, and where they have some restaurants or some kind of economic resources. So that is where the tourist economy is also an important aspect, how communities have believed that the livelihood is also a part of cultural resource. And we'll go to another case in the same Mediterranean climate. In 1968, there has been a vast earthquake which has destroyed the western Sicily, almost leaving 1 lakh people homeless. There is a small city called Ghibellina, and this is one of the most affected places in the Belize Valley, which was completely razed to the ground, and its community of shepherds and farm laborers relocated to the temporary tent camps. Now, when you talk about an earthquake affected area, obviously the whole rubble creates a massive scene, that is very destructive scene for the people. Some have, under the immediate impact of a disaster, they tend to look for, first safeguarding themselves and try to look for an immediate shelter. So that is where they moved to the temporary tent camps. But then, at that time, the mayor of that particular Ghibellina, Mayor Cora, he thought about how disasters could be taken as an opportunity rather than a curse, because disasters are the agents of change. So why not take this as a golden opportunity, and how we can build a society with these modernistic philosophies and ideologies. So what he did was, he promoted an idea of the cultural renaissance through the urban reconstruction of Ghibellina. And his vision, that is where we talk about a conceived space of the visionaries, of the politicians, of the architects, of the intellect, how they want to perceive this space, the urban space, and how it has to showcase the visions of modernity. Also a symbol of emancipation for a region considered by the rest of, so it wants to be a model for the rest of the country. It's a showcase model that it can show that this is how the modernism, it's a modernist understanding of the place, and how it can become a role model for the other cities within the region. And because when something has been affected, and when someone is really working out on bringing a lot of thoughts and visions into the placemaking process, it becomes a laboratory, a big laboratory attracting various artists, various architects, and various intellectuals coming from all over Italy to contribute to make a laboratory of ideas on new forms of building. So how an art and architecture can come together, how we can actually revitalize the whole community, and how they can actually come up with this kind of aftermath of a disaster, and how they can actually bring back to the normal, and that too in a more of a modernistic understanding. So what they did was, they brought a lot of artists, they developed a lot of plazas, in the piazzas. Here you can see that the Piazza del Comune, the community plaza with Torre Civica, is a kind of civic plaza. And here you can see the new cathedral by Ludovico Curani, and the various artists have come to install their own ideas in the form of plazas, in the form of squares, in the form of monuments, in the form of buildings, in the form of housing, also some smaller level of artwork. And in terms of the new dwellings, they actually aimed for about 50,000 people. But today, unfortunately, only for the 5,000 people live there. And much of the housing, if you can see that they have these front gardens and they have these detached housing, and the whole street, there's a vast street layouts that separates from the neighborhood. They're all like a row house aspect, but that communal interaction gets missing in this process, because the Mediterranean countries, they have this veranda concepts, and the evenings they sit outside, they chit chat with each other. But now with the scale of the street and the footpath and the parking and the front garden, and so the whole scale have taken away the social interaction. In fact, instead of socializing, it has fostered the isolation and segregation of users. That is how this project have ended up with. In here, what you can see in this slide is the plazas. Do you see any people? Here the demographic understanding has been hyped a lot, from 5,000, and they've aimed for 50,000, and the infrastructure is planned accordingly. Today what you see is an empty plazas, an empty cathedrals, so all together an empty one. And few locals have understood the connection between the artwork and the reconstruction of the city, how art can actually bring encouragements with the people, how they can engage them in the participatory ways, and how they can realize this innovative way of connecting with the art. And many workshops have been conducted by the artists coming from different parts of Italy and with the local citizens. And in fact, rather than fostering active engagement for co-creation of the artistic landscape and the city, the institutions wash their hands on their responsibilities, leaving the artists to fill the gap. So in that process, what happened was, because there is a lot of participatory activities working on, and they could see that, yes, there is a scope of engaging the public, and gradually the funding, either the funding institutions or the organizing institutions, they try to wash away their hands that, yes, why don't you guys carry on with your artwork, and try to fill the gap. And also, there's been a infrastructure, many of the infrastructure has remained unfinished because there has been mismanagement and also some political corruptions. And what they have envisioned about the city and what they have got is a complete vast scale of a city which is utterly silence. Also, what you can see is the Creto, which is designed by Alberto Burri. This is about a 12-hectare land. This is actually the old village where the whole village has got destroyed. Now what they did was, they covered with almost a 1 meter height of the concrete blocks, and these alleyways are actually the existing street network of that village, so that they want to bring that memory of that skeleton of that village as it is in a kind of block model. But one can imagine of the scale of this artwork. It is, we call it as it's a kind of concrete jungle. 12 hectares of land has been concretized as a part of, in the name of the art, and it has been as a memory. So they try to preserve this street network for people to walk and navigate through the sculpture, so they can orient themselves, they can reflect the memories, where they belong to, where they used to live, that whole memories could be an attachment. But the whole thing, what you actually observe is, the whole thing is now a silence place. Unfortunately, the Creto and the Ghibellina Nova, which have been rebuilt, the common thing is the silence. And why this silence is all about? I mean, what are the factors that brought this silence? The first one, the Creto, which is captured under the shroud of cement, archaeology of the archaeology, as a reminder of the past. So they're trying to reflect as a memory, which is a completely shredded with the cement blocks. And the second is the symmetry of houses, squares, monuments and unfinished infrastructure. So the second one is actually is it is the houses which are made for the people, but still not many people are living here and not much of social aspect is there in Gibellina. And there is also about the livelihood, how they can actually get their livelihood aspects of it. There are all many other factors which is related to it. So the scale has been in this, what we are learning, the scale has been hyped. And as a result of that, what we are seeing is the infrastructural input has been mismanaged and an unfinished work has been held over. So in that way, in the name of beautification of the project, but it has actually created a different ugly unfinished parts, and that way it has also developed some kind of illegal spaces, that people just left over these unfinished artworks or unfinished projects like that, because of there was a funding mismanagement, there is the institutional, the way they looked at these artists and the work. So this whole thing has actually reveals us that the lack of understanding of the local cultural needs and how the short term, medium term and the long run adaptation process. So how one can think of the incrementality and one has not think of the incrementality. So if the same project has been thought in a more of an incremental level, that would have been a better success. In a cultural context, when we are providing a shelter, there is always two, and they are very distinct. One is the haves and the have-nots, the powerful and the powerless, the relief organizations and the victims of the disaster. So one is on the upper hand and one is on the taking hand. So the moment when these NGOs, when these agencies come into the picture, many at times what they do is they perceive the local knowledge, they perceive that this system, this particular social system has failed to receive the expected conditions of life from the system. So that is where the larger collective stress situations took place, that how the system has failed. But then many of the relief operations, when they come into the rescue or the rehabilitation projects, they try to reject and in favor of the systems familiar to and excised by the relief culture. So they either they either rely more on what they have already executed and also the relief culture, though they try to undermine the local systems, they try to undermine the local traditions. And a victim culture is always been made aware of the failure of the local, traditional and indigenous systems to either anticipate the disaster or be able to cope up when it happens. So basically, the moment a foreigner, the institution comes working to serve you, and that is where they see that this whole system has failed. They never see that how this has survived all these years, how they used to live, what are the mechanisms that they do have. So that complete ignorance of and lack of understanding of the system, that brings a big gap. That is where such kind of situations, when they were made aware that your system have failed, that is where it leads to the loss of faith in the traditional leadership and hierarchies of the social and the religious order, making the distressed community still more prone to the external influence. So some of the options, they come with a ready-made options, either from what they've already done before, and they just give you, this is the options, why not you take one of these. Doran Massey, a geographer, she talked about place is a social construct, and we actively make places, and our ideas of place are the products of the society in which we live. On the similar context, can we not link the dialogue of, can the vulnerability of a place is also a social construct? Because we are the responsible people, how we are making ourselves vulnerable in that particular situation. Let's come to some of my own study which I am currently doing. This is on the Hudhud cyclone affected areas. So I visited some of the villages in Visakhapatnam, which is in the coastal Andhra Pradesh, and visited many of the government officials, the collectorates and the statistical department to see what other NGOs are working on and what kind of projects they are doing on and how the damage statistics have been gathered. So many of these reports, whether we talk about the damage statistics, how much loss of life is damaged, how much property has been damaged, they are narrowed down to the numericals. They are narrowed down to the surface structures of the society, and they are often reduced to the statistical terms. So you can say that estimated crop loss, this much, area more than 50%, number of people evacuated, number of villages affected. So these are all narrowed down to the numbers. But that is where it is more to do with the economic aspect, how much fund is required for it, how much investment is needed for that. If you look, these are some of the villages called Bhimilipattanam, and you can see the traditional patterns of living. They have the thatch roof systems which have very low eaves because of the cyclone affected areas and the coastal areas. So they try to have this indigenous understanding of the local climatic conditions. And it is also serving their way of life, how the fisherman's life is also celebrated and how functionally it works. But if you look at the modern constructions, you can see even the drainage has left just alone like this. So which means the agencies have looked only at a house but not as a system of things. A settlement is not just only a group of houses. It is not just a thing. It is a system of things. And it can incorporate the road layer network, it can incorporate the drainage systems, the electricity, the supply, water supply. So everything together that makes a habitat. But here when you go on an individual, a house for a house, you build a house, when NGO comes and build a house, you go away and that's it. So what happens next? How it affects the neighbor? So that is where we are missing in that level. In many of the villages where I have visited that these damaged houses, yes, they have been accounted that it's been partially damaged or fully damaged, but then these are left isolated because they might have moved to other place or they might have been adjusted to a new place. But what happened to these? So even after 10 years, if you ever go to Latur earthquake affected areas or even in tsunami, there are many villages, you can see these damaged villages just lying like that. So there is no thought process of how one can even clean up this debris or how we can reuse these materials. So there is all many aspects one can think of. So what you can see in the whole village is bits and pieces of the rubble which has been damaged by the cyclone or damaged houses. In between you are building a new houses. So there is no understanding of the old part, but only they are looking at what we are constructing, For instance, this is the story of a house as a joint family house. And many of these poor houses, the government has given only 5,000 rupees as a kind of support to rebuild their house, the roof. And the reality is 3 families still live in the same house. So I was wondering how could they able to live in these houses. So then they said, yeah, we mostly sleep here, being a coastal area, we can sleep there because that 5,000 was not sufficient for us to keep all the roofs. So what we do is we negotiate with our neighbors and they sleep on the nights in their verandas. So that is how when you narrow down to numericals or you narrow down only to the 5,000 rupees or a particular amount to be given, I think if you don't monitor it, how they are going to build up, and this is after 2 years, this is the case. So I think this is where one has to look at it is not how much you are providing, but how much they have done and what needs to be done. This is where a re-evaluation has to be done in these kind of cases. There is another case like where different corporate agencies come, like for example, this was a project by Infosys Foundation, where as a part of their corporate social responsibilities, they try to come and deliver the housing solutions. And when you look at this housing, they have a very good road network, they have very good houses, brick and concrete houses, slightly far away, like 2-3 kilometers, 3-4 kilometers from the shore. But then, at least when I visited this place, not many people have occupied these places. Maybe now people might have taken, but that point of time, not even a single person have occupied these houses. I used to take some interviews with them, and then I asked the fishermen why. They said, our fishing needs are very different. We want to stay close to the seashore. Though we like a house, but still our needs are a little different. So in gradual process, they also have worried about how the local politicians and their networks, how they can grab these houses on the name of fishermen. That is also one of the threat which even fishermen feel about. So if the fisherman has a different cultural need, and similar to the Gibellina of understanding of the uniform and the standardized forms of housing, and how it often gets rejected by the communities because of their cultural needs, livelihood needs. That is where we say about the house is a denotative, whereas a home is a connotative. The house or a small dwelling describes the structure, whereas the home is symbolic of the life spent within it. The home is a connotative of the deep structures of the social system and how these are reflected in family's relationship to the domestic space it occupies. So here, what we are able to see is that it is not just the four walls which a house is all about. It is about the family, it is about their social relationships, how a social space is created. So Henry Lefebvre talks from the conceived space which the planners or the foundation have visioned like this in a modernistic understanding, and the perceived space how they try to adjust with it, and the lived space come with a longer run adjustments, longer run accommodation, how their habitual practices set this place with a different meanings, how they manifest these spaces with the cultural dimension. That is where the lived space comes into it. And I think I'll summarize on how in the first version of Build Back Better by Michael Lyons and Theo Schilderman and Camalino Bono's work, how they even brought some of the compiled work of various scholars from different regions, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Peru, Colombia, Turkey, and all other places. So the model which has been followed in the reconstruction processes, one is an aspect of addition. Like what they do is, sometimes the approach is through a singular NGOs, like okay, there are 5-6 houses this NGO will sponsor, another 5-6 houses this NGO will sponsor. So that time the NGO only looks at that house. They only talked about one house, one at a time, one family, because their contract is all about delivering 2 or 3 or 4 houses. Whereas in the multiplication model, from one house to 100. So here, this is where the agency-driven control. So what they do is they develop a schemata or a model of a particular house, and they replicate it, whether it's a township, whether it is a cluster. So in that way, they try to develop as a uniform and the standardized models of it, and this is mostly as an agency-driven process. Whereas the replication, it is basically a cluster has been developed, and that would be replicated in the whole settlement. But here, in this and this, in the agency-driven process, what happens is the agency will not consider a lot of differential aspects, especially in terms of space requirements, the communal response to it, and the needs, or the situational analysis, how it has changed before disaster and after disaster. A woman loses her husband in the disaster, what happens to her? What kind of house she needs? So this kind of understanding is not really goes within this process, because it only takes for the model and how it is repeated of 100 houses. Whereas here, this involves a longer run engagement to understand each neighborhood, a group of families. It will take time, but the problem with this is the media pressure will be there, the political pressure will be there, the institutional pressure will be there. So there are a lot of constraints which will add on to this aspect. In the second model of the contractor driven, what they do is they try to develop a kit of parts approach. For instance, they develop a template of walling material, the foundation and the roofing material or whatever. So they try to give a template of, and then people were asked to choose within that. So in that way, the kit is provided, and there's a little flexibility is adopted in the standardized design process. Whereas in the second process of application, where Benny Kuriakose have worked on 2000 designs for 2000 houses. So that is where a deeper engagement is required with the community, and they have to actually interact with the community. And finally they developed over 7 to 8 alternatives, and again and one-to-one interaction with the architects has been allowed, and that is where even the further final modifications have been done. This requires a very thorough bottom-up process of it. I hope you understand the cultural issues and what are the ways of designing and how it has been overlooked, and as a response what are the consequences of it, and what are the various models of designing the housing. Thank you very much.